Hey guys, today we're going to be upgrading my betta fish tank. He's in a 5-gallon, and we're going to put him in a 10-gallon. He wasn't a 10 before, but I downgraded him to a 5. Now I'm putting him back in a 10. This is a full breakdown and rebuild of my betta fish's tank. His name is Buck. He's a longfin betta. But as you know, most of my content is geared towards beginners in this hobby. We've all been beginners at something in life. But in my opinion, fish keeping is pretty hard to get into because, it's not only a hobby, you're dealing with live animals and, keeping them alive and healthy is a big part of it. So I'm going to explain every step and why I do it. My first step in any tank breakdown is turning off all the equipment. That's filters, heaters, bubblers. Obviously leave your light plugged in so you can see what you're doing, but you want to unplug everything before you drain the water. I drain the water because everything is a lot more manageable, I find. It's a lot easier to catch fish because there's less vertical room for them to move. And if you've ever tried to catch a fish, it's not that easy sometimes. Luckily, my betta fish is kind of slow, so he's really easy to catch. Then once you have all the fish out, you can start removing a lot of the plants. You can remove the plants before the fish. If you have fish that like to hide a lot, it'd be easier to remove everything so that way there's nowhere for them to hide and you can kind of scoop them up easier. But the main goal right now is to just get everything out of the tank. And you want to remove, obviously all the animals very safely because you don't want to hurt anybody. But I spent about 30 minutes trying to catch 30 shrimp. I personally like to remove all the shrimp and all the snails and be super thorough about it, just because they are, living animals that I am responsible for, and I wouldn't feel right not doing my part in getting them all out. Once every living creature you know for a fact is out of the tank, then you can start removing the substrate. I just use my hand. I find it a lot easier. Some people use cups or, little pails, but this size tank, it's just a lot easier to use your hand. Once you get enough out of there that the tank isn't, full of anything, then you can remove it. It's not ideal to lift a tank that has a ton of water in it, but that was just a little bit of water and I wasn't too worried about it. My next step here is preparing the next tank. I have tons of tanks lying around because I've been keeping fish for a very long time. You tend to kind of collect tanks. But this one was on the shelf. It had some hard water spots. It kind of had some sand in there. It was just, gross. I needed to clean it out. So I got my Python, filled it with some water, rubbed down all the silicone on the sides, got all the sand that was stuck to it, just all the dirt and grime that I can find. Then I went in with some white vinegar. I didn't measure. I just, dump a little bit in. And then I just kind of rub that all around the tank, and you can see I try to get all those little hard water stains off. Vinegar is really good for getting that off because it's mostly just calcium, and vinegar is acidic and will get rid of calcium. But I just clean everything really thoroughly, get all the sides. Vinegar also is a little bit of a disinfectant, I think, maybe. I don't know. But anyways, I do the vinegar, rinse it out, and then I repeat the process again with just rinsing it because you don't want any vinegar in the tank when your fish go in there. Now we have a nice, clean base to start off with. There's something about an empty fish tank just sitting there waiting to be scaped. I don't know. It's kind of exciting. I also live my life like an old person, so these are the types of things that excite me. But once I get the light plugged in, it's just look at that. Ready to go. Nice and clean. Now here's the part that might surprise some people. I am actually going to use that nasty, dirty substrate from the old tank and use that as a nutrient-rich layer for this tank. I use real plants in all of my tanks. They just have so many benefits to not have, and they're pretty, so why not? But plants need nutrients to grow, so using quote-unquote dirty substrate from an old tank is actually one of the best fertilizers for your plants. And this might seem confusing now, but I do what's called substrate layers. I do a nice base of a nutrient-rich substrate, whether that is, sand and dirt from an old tank, or brand new aqua soil from a fluval bag. But either way, my base layer is always a nutrient-rich base. It just really helps the plants thrive. I'm just doing a lot of smoothing out. You can see I push a lot of it to the back, and that's to create some depth. If you make the back of the aquarium taller with substrate, when you look at it from the front, it'll give the illusion of some depth in your fish tank. Now, this is where things didn't exactly go to plan. That'll happen a lot in this hobby. I thought I had enough sand. I 1000% did not have enough sand. So in the middle of this entire tank build, I had to run to the pet store and buy a brand new bag of sand. Here's kind of my realization of like, I don't think this is enough. Especially when you have a nutrient-rich base like that, you really want a thicker layer compared to your nutrient base. You kind of want like a 2-to-1 ratio. You want to have a lot more sand on top of your nutrient-rich base because you don't want any of that stuff getting into the water column. You want to keep that contained underneath the sand. This is to keep your water cleaner, obviously. And so that it doesn't degrade faster and that your plants can use it for longer. I may or may not have accidentally put like way too much sand in here. So I actually used a turkey baster and scooped up some of the sand out of the tank. Now here comes the actual fun part, which is putting everything together. This piece of wood was in the old tank. I wasn't planning on spending, any money really on this rebuild. The only thing I actually bought was the sand. I have a ton of rocks and wood kind of lying around from other projects that I've disassembled in the past. And that's a perk about this hobby, is that the more you keep going, the more aquascaping materials you kind of collect over time. I have my own shelf full of wooden rocks. It's a real fun time. But if I could go on like a shopping spree and buy a whole new set of stuff to scape a tank with, I definitely would. This was kind of just like a spur of the moment little project I was doing, so I didn't want to buy anything is basically what I'm saying. So, this tank isn't going to be super aesthetic and put together, but I wanted to build a tank that fits the lifestyle of my betta. He's a longfin betta, and longfin bettas, their tails are actually a little too heavy for them, and they can get pretty tired pretty easy. So having a lot of spaces where they can kind of lay down and rest is super important for them. I have had this rock for, I think, 4 years. I had it in one big tank. It was in a 45-gallon tank, and I didn't want it in there anymore, so it's just kind of been sitting. And I figured this was a perfect rock for him. There's tons of, surface area for him to lay down on. So yes, I am mixing different kinds of rocks, different kinds of wood together, and ideally, in, say, an ADA aquascape tank, you don't really see that often. But this is just, my little home aquarium, and I'm working with what I have. Now, I found a couple pieces of driftwood in my little driftwood pile that I thought would be cute for this tank. It needed some more substance to it, so I just started adding things and seeing how they looked. The fun part about aquascaping is reorienting everything, seeing how it looks, deciding if you want it in a different spot. Now, this piece of manzanita wood right here, it looks pretty good. It has a nice flow with, the rocks in the background, but I just wasn't really vibing with it. So I moved it around a couple times, found out where I wanted it, and I think my layout was pretty good for it. Fun fact, this piece of manzanita wood was the first ever driftwood I purchased for a fish tank, and this is going to sound so silly, but this was the only piece of driftwood in my 45-gallon tank for a long time. That's when I was still pretty new to all this. I think I spent about $40 on that piece of wood, and I had to debark it myself, so, But I'm just weighing down these pieces of wood that I'm putting in there with some rocks because this wood is not waterlogged. If I didn't weigh down these pieces of wood, then they would just float, and nobody wants that. That's a common beginner thing, is they'll get a piece of driftwood and they'll put it in the tank. They're like, oh my god, it floats. But right now what I'm doing is securing the manzanita wood to the rock, and I'm using the tissue paper, toilet paper, whatever, and super glue method. Yes, super glue, this specific kind, is perfectly safe for aquariums. Now obviously don't go, dumping super glue into your aquariums, but for little things like this, it's completely safe. This is Starbond Super Thin. Any super glue that contains cyanocrylate is 100% safe for aquariums. The most popular one is probably going to be the Gorilla Glue Gel. Gel is a lot better for securing plants to woods and rocks. And the Starbond Super Thin is better for the method that I just showed you, where you put some toilet paper, put the super glue on it, and it will harden really fast. I do have to warn you that if you do this method, it will cause smoke and fumes, and it's not recommended to inhale it, like at all. It'll burn your throat and your lungs, and I do know that from experience. Now we're gonna head on over to the snail, guppy, and shrimp tank, and we're gonna steal a little plant cutting from here. The plants grow super well in this tank. There's tons of fertilization. The shrimp keep everything clean, free of algae, so it's really a perfect tank for plants to grow out in. But Bucephalandra is super easy to propagate. You literally just cut the rhizome, make sure there's some leaves and some roots on the piece, and you're good to go. Look at this nice, healthy piece. Now the reason I took this out and wanted to add it in here is because there's a little tiny crevice in the big rock, and you'll see where I put it. I was kind of concerned about the betta possibly getting stuck in there, so if you ever have any spaces like that in your tank where you're afraid a fish can get stuck, honestly just covering it with a plant will do the trick most of the time. All I did was apply a tiny bit of super glue to the roots and just stuck it in there. I also found a little rock to put over it, because just to make sure the betta can't get stuck in there. I always get so worried about him. He's not the brightest crayon in the box sometimes, so I just kind of plop that on there, and it's just some added protection. Now here comes the fun part, which is filling the tank with water. This part is always super stressful for, anybody who's aquascaping, because once you start filling a tank with water, things can shift unpredictably sometimes, and the hours of work you just did can kind of get erased. I'm just getting my dechlorinator ready to put in when the water starts going. But if you ever do an aquascape like this, there's tons of methods to fill it up without disturbing things too much. The thing that I do most of the time is try and just pour it onto a rock or a piece of wood that has a lot of surface area. You can see here some of the sand is getting disturbed, but not a huge deal. The tank is always going to be cloudy the first time you fill it up. The temperature from the water creates bubbles on the wall, it creates micro bubbles on literally everything, but it'll clear up, give it a day or two. Now I'm just placing my heater in there. I thought that was the best place for it, so that's where I put it. Now, I personally like to use heater controllers on all of my fish tanks. It is just a safeguard for protecting your animals, really. In my experience, it's not a matter of if heaters fail, it's when they fail, and that could mean not heating up, or it could be getting too hot and, harming your fish with temperatures, which has happened to me in the past, which is why I always use a heater controller, literally no matter what. I put my betta fish in a little cup, and I'm going to slowly add some of the new tank water into the cup. You know, he's just in the old tank water right now. The temperature cooled down a little bit. The new temperature in the new tank is a little bit higher, so you never want to shock your animals with temperature changes, parameter changes. So it's best to give them a little bit of new water at a time to acclimate them. Now comes time to put all of the plants back in the tank. I do the stem plants after the water is filled up, because if you don't, they'll kind of just like flop around and be really hard to know where you're putting them. But this is that Bacopa monnieri I was talking about earlier, and some of these pieces were super long, so I ended up cutting them in half, propagating them, you know, creating more. So once they grow and fill in, it'll, you know, be a lot nicer and a lot more lush. But this is just the start of a new tank, and everybody has that experience with plants. Now we're gonna head over to my dwarf pea puffer tank, where I have like a cryptocrine farm going. I wanted to try a new method of quote-unquote carpeting. If you look up carpeting plants are pretty hard to do sometimes. So I was like, well, what if I just make a carpet out of cryptocrines? And that's what I did for this tank, and I actually really love it, and I'll probably do it in some other tanks. But cryptocrine is super easy to propagate. It grows pretty fast. So I just took 2 out of this tank, and I'm gonna put it in the new tank. Now this little tool that I'm using is actually a sand mover arounder. I'm just kind of like going around and getting some of those bubbles off. Not that they cause any harm or anything, I just, you know, don't like the way they look, and it looks nicer on camera when everything isn't covered in micro bubbles. Now I started to hook up my sponge filter back, and the bubbles weren't working, so I actually had to change out the bottom piece and, you know, connect the airline tubing and do all this other stuff. That's why the video is like super speed right now, because it literally took me like 15 minutes, which is kind of annoying sometimes, but you'll run into that in this hobby. But now I'm putting Buck in his new house. So exciting. It's always so exciting watching fish check out their new house. It's like, I built this for you. What do you think? You know? So I sped it up a little. You can kind of see him like going around exploring things, checking things out. And this is really cool right here, actually. You can see him using his swim bladder. I didn't speed this up or slow it down. This is real time, him using his swim bladder to move up in the tank, which is super cool. But yeah, he'll swim around for a little bit and check things out. But here's the tank the next day. It's absolutely stunning. I love how this came out. I think Buck likes it too. As you can see, he spends a lot of time lounging around because of that big tail of his. But yeah, I think he likes it, and I'm happy for him that he likes it. But yeah, super pretty, and I'm really happy with the result. If you like this video and want more content like this, be sure to follow, subscribe, like. Thank you.